Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at AstraZeneca.
Sounds good.
And, you guys have been asking us to do a deep dive on them for a while now, so we're finally getting to it. We've got some great information from Wikipedia, Zacks, and tip ranks, so we'll be diving into all those. The main question, of course, that we're going to be looking at is AstraZeneca stock a good fit for your portfolio? So let's just jump right into it. AstraZeneca has a really long history, right?
Yeah, they have a really fascinating history, actually. They were originally founded all the way back in 1913 in Sweden by a group of 400 doctors and apothecaries,
Wow.
which is a really interesting start, kind of showing their deep roots in the medical world.
Yeah, that's a really cool start. I mean, that's a long time ago, too.
It is a long time ago, and it wasn't until 1999 that the company, as we know it today, was formed through a merger. You had the Swedish company Astra AB and the British company Zeneca Group, and they joined forces. And that's how we got AstraZeneca.
That makes sense. So they've been around for a while.
Yeah.
And since then, they've grown even more through a bunch of acquisitions, right?
Yeah, exactly. They've made a number of strategic acquisitions over the years. A couple of the notable ones were Cambridge Antibody Technology back in 2006. That was to bring in expertise in antibody development.
Okay.
And then MedImmune in 2007, which was a big step for them to strengthen their position in biologics, especially when it comes to flu vaccines. So they've been really actively growing and expanding into different areas.
So they've got a long history. They've been growing through acquisitions. And it seems like they're pretty financially healthy, too, at least from what Zacks is telling us.
Yeah, Zacks paints a pretty positive picture when it comes to their financial performance.
Okay.
Notably, they have a Zacks value score of B and a growth score of B. And those are actually very impressive, especially when you compare them to some of their main competitors like Novartis and Sanofi.
Interesting.
They both kind of lag behind, particularly in the growth category. So, AstraZeneca seems to be doing something right.
So that's really interesting. Strong value, strong growth.
Hmm.
But Zacks also gives them an F score for momentum.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not a financial expert, so what exactly does that mean? Should we be worried about that?
So momentum scores, it's basically an indicator of how the stock price has been doing recently, how it's been performing compared to the overall market or to companies in the same industry.
Okay.
So an F score, it does suggest that maybe the stock price hasn't been doing as well as some others lately. It's been kind of lagging behind.
Okay.
Now, there could be a few reasons for that. Sometimes it's because of investor sentiment towards the whole pharmaceutical sector.
Mhm.
Maybe investors are feeling a little bit less enthusiastic about pharmaceutical companies in general.
Okay.
But there could also be some reasons that are specific to AstraZeneca. So, for instance, investors might be a bit hesitant because they know some of AstraZeneca's key drugs are going to be losing their patents soon, which, of course, could mean less revenue in the future. And, there was that massive acquisition of Election Pharmaceuticals, which was definitely a smart strategic move. But anytime you have such a big acquisition, it also comes with a certain level of risk. Can they integrate everything smoothly? Can they make it work? And that can make some investors a little cautious. So all these things together, plus whatever's happening in the overall market, that could be why their momentum score is a little bit lower.
So it doesn't necessarily mean they're doing badly, right?
Right. It's not a guarantee of anything. It's just something to kind of keep in mind as you're looking at the bigger picture.
So we've got the financials. They seem to be doing pretty well overall, even though that momentum score is a bit of a question mark. But how about their actual products and what they're working on? Their innovation pipeline. Are they keeping up with the competition in those areas?
Well, AstraZeneca has definitely carved out a strong position for themselves in a few key therapeutic areas. And those are mainly oncology, so cancer treatments, respiratory and inflammation and autoimmunity, and then cardiovascular and metabolic disease. So you've got heart issues, diabetes, things like that.
Okay.
And they have some really successful drugs in each of those categories, like their star performers, the ones that everyone's talking about. You have Tagrisso for lung cancer, Farxiga for type 2 diabetes, and then Fasenra for people with severe asthma.
So those are the big ones, huh?
Yeah, those are the ones that are bringing in a lot of the revenue for AstraZeneca. And they really highlight that AstraZeneca has been successful in addressing some serious medical needs, which is really important.
Yeah.
And what's even more promising, I think, is their commitment to innovation.
Yeah.
They're not just resting on their laurels with these existing drugs. They have a really impressive pipeline of new drug candidates, especially ones that are in the late stages of development, so they're getting close. And that shows that they're really dedicated to research and development, which is absolutely crucial if you want to succeed in the long term in the pharmaceutical industry. Things are constantly changing.
Yeah, it's a fast-moving industry for sure.
Mhm.
And one thing we've seen AstraZeneca doing a lot lately is making acquisitions. They've been pretty aggressive, especially with that big purchase of Election Pharmaceuticals in 2021. That was a $39 billion deal. And it was clearly a move to get into the rare diseases market. So how does that fit with their overall strategy, and how might that kind of acquisition affect their stock?
Well, acquisitions are definitely a key part of AstraZeneca's growth plan. Their approach is basically to identify new and promising areas in the medical world, and then instead of trying to develop everything themselves from scratch, they go out and buy companies that already have established products in those areas, or that have a really strong research pipeline in development.
So they're kind of buying their way into these new markets.
In a way, yeah, it's a way to cut down on the time and the expense of doing all the research in-house. And Election, with its focus on rare diseases, it was a really strategic acquisition for them. Because the rare disease market, even though it might seem niche, it's actually a growing area. There are a lot of unmet needs there, and people are willing to pay a lot for treatments that work.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So this acquisition really positions AstraZeneca as a leader in that segment, and it's expected to be a big contributor to their future revenue. But again, it's always good to remember, big acquisitions, they come with a certain amount of risk.
Yeah, that 39 billion, that's a big chunk of change. Speaking of money, let's talk about valuation. What do Zacks and tip ranks tell us about AstraZeneca's current market value? Is the stock overpriced, underpriced, or right where it should be?
When we're trying to figure out if a company is properly valued, we have to look at a few different things. And thankfully, Zacks and TipRanks give us some helpful data points to work with. Like
All right.
we have the price to earnings ratio, also known as the PE ratio. Then we have the price to cash flow and the price to sales. All of these ratios give us a slightly different way of looking at how much a company is worth. And when you look at those for AstraZeneca, you get a kind of mixed picture.
Okay.
Some of the numbers suggest that maybe the stock is a little bit overvalued right now,
Okay.
but then others suggest that the price is more or less reasonable. The important thing to remember is that valuation by itself, it's not a foolproof way to tell if a stock is a good or bad investment.
So it's not the whole story.
Right. You have to think about the company's potential for growth, how the overall market is doing. So trying to judge just based on valuation, it's a bit too simplistic. We need to dig a little deeper.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dig deeper. Let's talk about the pros and cons of owning AstraZeneca stock. So on the plus side, they have a pretty strong history of good financial performance.
Mm-hmm.
They have a diverse range of products. They're growing aggressively. They're committed to research and development. And according to tip ranks, their dividend yield is a healthy 2.47%. But of course, no investment is without risks. What are some of the biggest downsides or things people should be aware of when it comes to AstraZeneca?
Of course, yeah. Even with all the positives, potential investors need to keep in mind some of the risks. First of all, the pharmaceutical industry, it's inherently competitive.
Okay, yeah.
Companies are constantly battling it out to create the next big treatment. And something that always hangs over pharmaceutical companies is the issue of patents expiring. That's a big one. Once a patent expires, suddenly you've got generic competitors popping up, and that can really eat into a company's revenue.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And then you always have the whole regulatory landscape to deal with. Getting new drugs approved, it's a long and complicated process. It's not always predictable, and it can really affect how quickly a company can actually bring their products to market. Plus, the pharmaceutical industry, it just never stands still.
Constantly changing.
Exactly. There are always new technologies popping up, healthcare policies are shifting, and the global economy, well, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
All of these things play a role in how well a company like AstraZeneca is going to do. So when you're thinking about the risks, you really have to consider all of those factors.
A lot to think about there. But we've also been talking about that dividend yield. And they have these share buyback programs too. So how does their approach to dividends and buybacks compare to the rest of the industry? And what does it say about their confidence in their own future?
AstraZeneca's got a solid track record when it comes to paying dividends. They've been doing it consistently, and they've been steadily increasing the amount over time. And that makes them attractive for people who are looking for income from their investments.
Okay.
Their dividend yield of 2.47%, it's actually pretty in line with, maybe even a little bit better than the average for the industry.
Okay.
So it shows that they're definitely committed to giving back to shareholders. And then the share buyback programs, those are basically a way for the company to repurchase its own shares from the market.
Okay.
which means that there are fewer shares out there, which can boost the value of the remaining shares. And the fact that AstraZeneca is doing this, it does suggest that they feel confident about their future performance.
So you're saying it's a good sign.
Well, a lot of investors see it that way.
Mhm.
They see it as a signal that the company believes its own stock is currently undervalued. They think it's a good deal. And when a company's buying back its own stock, it can actually increase demand for that stock, which can drive up the price.
Oh, okay. So it's like a vote of confidence from the company itself.
Exactly. That's one way to look at it. Now, Wikipedia also mentions some recent controversies surrounding AstraZeneca, specifically things related to their operations in China and Russia, some tax disputes that they've been involved in, and certain marketing practices that have come under scrutiny. So, how could these controversies affect the way investors see AstraZeneca, and how could they potentially impact the stock price? Yeah, controversies are definitely something investors need to be aware of. But we're not going to delve into specific ethical or political considerations here. It's really important for every investor to do their own research, dig into these issues and form their own opinion on how they might affect AstraZeneca.
Makes sense. It's up to each individual to decide what they're comfortable with.
Exactly. And we want to give you the information objectively so you can make your own informed decisions.
All right. So we've covered a lot of ground already. We've talked about their history, their financials, their products, their acquisitions, even some of the controversies surrounding the company. But there's still a lot more to discuss.
Definitely. There are some really fascinating aspects of AstraZeneca's business and their role in the larger healthcare landscape that we haven't even touched on yet. So buckle up. We're just getting started.
All right, well, stay tuned because we'll be diving into all that and more in the next part of our deep dive on AstraZeneca.
So let's kind of dig into the financial performance of AstraZeneca a little bit more. We talked about how Zacks gives them a pretty strong B rating for both value and growth, which, as we said, indicates a really healthy financial position.
Right, and those are pretty impressive scores, especially when you compare them to some of their competitors.
Exactly. And, to really understand what's behind these scores, we got to look at some of the specific, the nitty-gritty financial metrics.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are some of the key metrics that really stand out to you? And what do those tell us about how financially healthy AstraZeneca is?
Well, the most important metrics that people always look at is the price to earnings ratio, the PE ratio.
Right, yeah, I've heard of that.
And basically what that does is it compares the company's stock price to its earnings per share.
Okay.
And so a high PE ratio usually means that investors are feeling pretty optimistic about the company's future growth.
Yeah.
They think things are going well, that the company's going to continue to do well.
Okay.
And on the other hand, a lower PE ratio, it might suggest that the company's undervalued or that maybe investors are a little bit worried about the company's future earnings.
Interesting. So where does AstraZeneca fall on that spectrum?
Well, AstraZeneca's PE ratio, it's actually kind of in the middle. It's not super high, but it's also not super low.
Okay.
So it seems like investors have kind of a balanced view of the company. They're expecting some growth, but they're not being overly, enthusiastic or overly cautious.
So kind of a wait-and-see approach.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of that. Another important metric to look at is the return on equity, or ROE. And that basically tells you how effectively the company is using the money that shareholders have invested to generate profit.
So a higher ROE is better, right?
Exactly. A higher ROE usually means that the company is managed well and that they're good at making a profit. And AstraZeneca actually has a pretty healthy ROE, which shows that they're using their capital efficiently to make money for their shareholders.
Okay, that sounds promising.
It is. It's a good sign, and it kind of reinforces that idea that they're financially strong and that they can deliver value to their investors. Now, another really crucial part of a company's financial health is its cash flow. The money coming in and the money going out.
Right, cash flow is king.
Exactly, because it shows you if a company can actually pay its bills, invest in new things, and even pay dividends to its shareholders. And thankfully, AstraZeneca has a really strong cash flow. They're generating a lot of cash, which gives them a lot of stability and flexibility. They can weather economic storms. They can invest in new opportunities without having to worry too much.
So all in all, pretty solid financial foundation, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'd say so. So that's definitely a plus for potential investors. Now, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about their innovation pipeline. We touched on it earlier, but I think it's worth digging a little deeper into the specifics of what they're doing in research and development and why their pipeline is considered so strong.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious to hear more about that. AstraZeneca has always had a reputation for being pretty innovative in the pharmaceutical industry. So what are they working on these days?
Well, they've always been committed to research and development. investing a lot of money and resources into finding new treatments. And their pipeline right now is not just big, it's also really focused. They're targeting areas where there's a real need for new and better treatments.
So they're not just throwing darts at a dartboard, they're really strategically choosing where to focus their efforts.
Exactly. And that's smart because it allows them to develop treatments that are in high demand and
Yeah.
that can command higher prices, which of course is good for their revenue in the long run.
Makes sense. So are there any specific drugs or therapeutic areas in their pipeline that are particularly exciting or that you think people should be paying attention to?
Oh, yeah, there are a few. One area where they're really strong is oncology. Cancer treatments. They have a bunch of promising drugs in development for all kinds of cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, blood cancers. And one thing that they're really focused on is this new type of therapy called antibody drug conjugates, or ADCs.
ADCs. What are those?
They're basically a way to deliver really potent anti-cancer drugs directly to the cancer cells while trying to minimize the damage to healthy cells.
Oh, wow. So kind of like a guided missile for cancer treatment.
Yeah, kind of like that. It's super targeted and it's showing a lot of promise in early studies. And AstraZeneca is one of the leading companies in this area. They have several ADCs in their pipeline, so it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
That's really fascinating. I mean, it's incredible to see how far cancer treatment has come.
It really is, and it's exciting to see AstraZeneca at the forefront of these new developments. Now, switching gears again, let's talk about acquisitions because that's been a big part of their growth strategy, as we've mentioned before, especially with that election deal.
Right. That was a huge acquisition. So how does that fit into their overall plan and what does it mean for their future?
Well, acquisitions have become a really important part of how they're growing in recent years. They still have their own internal research and development, of course, but they've realized that it's also smart to buy companies that already have products on the market or that have really promising technologies or expertise in specific areas.
Makes sense. So it's a way to speed up the process.
Exactly. They can get into new markets much faster. And the election acquisition is a perfect example of that. They wanted to get into the rare disease market, and election was already a leader in that space.
Right. And we talked about how that's a growing market with a lot of potential.
Yeah, it is. And election brought with it a whole portfolio of approved drugs for rare diseases, plus a bunch of new drugs that were in development. So it was a really strategic move for AstraZeneca.
But it was also a risky move, right? I mean, $39 billion, that's a lot of money to put on the line.
Oh, for sure. Any big acquisition comes with risks, but the potential rewards are also huge. If AstraZeneca can successfully integrate election and leverage their expertise in their products, it could really be a game changer for them.
So it's all about managing those risks and making sure the integration goes smoothly.
Exactly. They need to bring the two companies together seamlessly. Their operations, their cultures, their research and development efforts. Everything needs to work together if they want to maximize the benefits of this acquisition.
So it's a long-term play.
It definitely is. Now, let's shift gears one more time and talk about something that's becoming increasingly important in the pharmaceutical industry, the services business.
Yeah.
We tend to think of these companies as just developing and manufacturing drugs, but many of them are also offering a whole range of services to healthcare professionals and patients.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about that. So what kinds of services are we talking about and how significant is this for AstraZeneca?
Well, these services can include things like patient support programs, diagnostics, data analytics, even telehealth services. It's all about adding value to their core drug offerings and trying to improve patient outcomes. And of course, it's also a way to generate more revenue.
Makes sense. So is AstraZeneca doing much in this area?
They're investing in a variety of services that are aligned with their main therapeutic areas. So, for example, in oncology, they have patient support programs that help people who are going through cancer treatment, navigate the system and get the resources and information they need. They're also developing diagnostic tools that can help doctors figure out which patients are most likely to benefit from specific cancer therapies.
So it sounds like they're trying to take a more holistic approach to healthcare.
Yeah.
Not just focusing on the drugs, but also on the overall patient experience.
Exactly. And that's a trend we're seeing across the industry as companies try to find ways to stand out and provide more value to patients and healthcare providers.
It makes sense. I mean, it seems like a natural extension of what they're already doing.
It is, and it's smart business too now. Before we move on to our final thoughts, I think it's important to consider the bigger picture here, the economic impact of a company like AstraZeneca.
Right. I mean, they're a global giant, so they must have a pretty significant footprint on the world economy.
Oh, absolutely. Their operations create jobs. They stimulate economic activity, and they contribute to advancements in healthcare that have ripple effects all over the world.
So it's not just about their profits, it's about the broader impact they have on society.
Exactly. And there are so many ways that they contribute to the economy, for example. Their research and development activities employ thousands of scientists and researchers all over the world, and they invest billions of dollars every year in developing new treatments.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
It is, and that research not only leads to new discoveries and innovations, but it also supports a whole network of suppliers and service providers, the people who provide the equipment, the materials, the lab space, all the things that go into doing scientific research.
So it's like a whole ecosystem that they're supporting?
Yeah, exactly. And then you have their manufacturing and distribution operations, which also create jobs and support local economies all around the world. They have manufacturing plants in multiple countries, and their distribution networks reach almost every corner of the globe.
It's amazing to think about the scale of their operations.
It really is. And then, of course, you have the economic benefits that come from improved health outcomes.
Mhm.
When people are healthier, they're more productive, they miss less work, and they don't need as much expensive healthcare.
Right, so there's a positive feedback loop there.
Exactly. AstraZeneca's innovations not only help individual people, but they also contribute to a healthier and more productive society, which ultimately benefits the economy as a whole.
That's a really important point to remember. It's not just about the bottom line, it's about the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on something that's been getting a lot of attention lately: the impact of artificial intelligence, or AI, on the pharmaceutical industry.
AI. Yeah, it seems like AI is changing everything these days. So how is it affecting the world of pharmaceuticals?
Well, AI is being used in all sorts of ways in drug discovery, clinical trials, personalized medicine. It's really transforming the way these companies operate.
It sounds like a game changer.
It has the potential to be, for example, in drug discovery, AI algorithms can analyze huge amounts of data, you know, genetic information, clinical trial results, scientific literature, and all that to help identify promising drug targets much faster.
So it's like having a superpowered research assistant.
Yeah, kind of AI can spot patterns and connections that humans might miss, and that can dramatically speed up the process of finding new treatments. And it can also help to make the process more efficient and more likely to succeed.
Okay. And what about clinical trials? How does AI play a role there?
Well, AI can help to design clinical trials that are more efficient and more targeted. It can analyze patient data to figure out who the best candidates are for a particular trial, which makes the trial more likely to produce meaningful results. And it can also help to monitor patient progress during the trial so that any problems can be spotted early on and adjustments can be made if necessary.
So it's about making the trials smarter and more effective.
Exactly. And that's really important because clinical trials are a huge part of drug development, and they can be very lengthy and very expensive.
So anything that can speed up that process and make it more efficient is a big plus.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you have personalized medicine, which is becoming more and more important as we move away from this one-size-fits-all approach to healthcare.
Right. It's all about tailoring treatments to the individual patient.
Exactly. And AI can play a big role in that by analyzing a patient's genetic information, their medical history, their lifestyle factors, all that stuff, to figure out what the best treatment is for that specific person.
So it's like having a customized treatment plan for every patient.
Yeah, kind of. And that's where AI has the potential to really revolutionize healthcare. It can lead to better outcomes, fewer side effects, and lower costs in the long run.
It's really amazing to think about the possibilities.
It is, and AstraZeneca is definitely on board with this. They're investing in AI and exploring its applications across their business.
So it sounds like they're positioning themselves well for the future.
Yeah, I think so. They seem to recognize that AI is going to be a major force in healthcare, and they're taking steps to make sure they're not left behind.
Now, before we move on to our final thoughts on AstraZeneca, I want to take a moment to thank our viewers on YouTube for tuning in.
Yeah, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives like this one.
We really appreciate your support, and we love hearing from you, so be sure to leave us a comment and let us know what stocks you'd like us to cover in the future.
We're always looking for new ideas, so let us know what you're interested in.
Okay, so now let's wrap things up with our final thoughts on AstraZeneca.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about their history, their financials, their products, their acquisitions, their approach to innovation, and even their embrace of artificial intelligence.
It's been a pretty comprehensive overview.
It has, and I think it's safe to say that AstraZeneca is a company with a lot of potential. They have a strong track record. They're financially healthy, they're investing in the future, and they seem to be making smart strategic decisions.
But of course, as with any investment, there are always risks to consider.
Right, we talked about some of those risks, things like patent expirations, the competitive landscape, the challenges of integrating large acquisitions. All those things are important to keep in mind.
And that F score for momentum from Zacks is definitely something that investors should be aware of.
It's a reminder that no stock is a guaranteed winner and that you always need to do your research and make sure that any investment aligns with your own goals and your risk tolerance.
So the ultimate question is AstraZeneca a good fit for your portfolio?
And unfortunately, there's no easy answer to that question. It really depends on your individual circumstances. What are your investment goals? What's your risk appetite? How does AstraZeneca fit into your overall strategy?
Right, there's no magic formula.
Exactly. But hopefully, this deep dive has given you the information you need to start making that decision for yourself.
Yeah.
We've presented the facts, we've talked about the pros and cons, and now it's up to you to weigh all that information and decide if AstraZeneca is right for you.
And if you're not sure, it's always a good idea to talk to a financial advisor.
Absolutely. They can help you assess your individual situation and give you personalized advice.
So that's our deep dive on AstraZeneca. We hope you found it informative and helpful.
And remember, knowledge is power. The more you know, the better equipped you are to make smart investment decisions.
So keep learning, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep investing wisely. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of business and finance.
So we've talked about a lot of the, kind of the business side of AstraZeneca, but let's not forget about what's at the heart of the pharmaceutical industry, actually developing new treatments and, potentially helping to improve people's lives. AstraZeneca's got this, this whole pipeline of drugs that they're working on in different stages of development, targeting, all kinds of diseases. Yeah, their pipeline is pretty impressive. It really shows that they're serious about innovation. And they're really focused on finding treatments for diseases where there aren't a lot of good options right now. They're investing a ton of money in R&D, and they're working with other companies and institutions to get access to the latest technologies and speed up the process of discovering new drugs.
So it's not just about doing the research themselves, it's about collaborating with others too.
Yeah, exactly. It's a much more collaborative approach these days. So what are some of the most promising areas that they're working on? Well, they've got some exciting stuff happening in oncology, cancer treatments. They're developing new therapies for lung cancer, breast cancer, blood cancers, all kinds of cancers. And they're also working on innovative treatments for cardiovascular disease, respiratory diseases, autoimmune diseases, a really wide range of conditions.
And of course, we can't forget about their move into rare diseases, which we've talked about a bit already. That's a market with a lot of potential for growth, and they seem to be going all in on that.
Yeah, for sure. That acquisition of Election Pharmaceuticals gave them a really strong position in the rare disease market. And they're already building on that foundation with their own research and development program. So it's not just about what Election already had, it's about what they can create together in the future.
So it seems like they're covering a lot of ground, from common diseases to rare diseases, from cancer to heart disease to everything in between.
They are, and that's one of their strengths, having such a broad pipeline. It helps to spread out the risk. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
And it gives them multiple opportunities for growth. They're not just relying on one or two blockbuster drugs. They're betting on a whole portfolio of potential therapies.
Makes sense. So it's a pretty well-balanced approach.
Yeah, I think so. It's a mix of risk and reward, which is what you'd expect in the pharmaceutical industry. Of course, not all of these drug candidates that they're working on are going to make it to market. The failure rate in drug development is pretty high.
Yeah, I've heard that it's a really tough business.
It is. But AstraZeneca has a good track record of bringing new drugs to market. And they really understand the whole regulatory process, all the hoops you have to jump through to get a drug approved.
So they know how to play the game, so to speak.
Yeah, they do. They've got the experience, the resources, the expertise to make it happen.